All right, we're back with more college football coverage, and we are still continuing a look into the Sharon Moore situation. There have been a few more details that have come out since the initial wave of info. Again, not anything that's going to be too eye-opening, I would say, before January 22nd when he has to appear in court for the case. But in a situation like this, you have to take it bit by bit. And especially when you consider now that there's an added wrinkle to things as the Jerem Block law firm is going to investigate the athletic department as a whole compared to just Sharon Moore, as we already detailed in the last video. But I guess one point of contention, uncertainty amongst everyone as we've kind of heard about the situation is fuller context into what exactly the relationship looked like. Now I got some info explaining how they had been in a relationship for years and how things had reportedly gotten far, far deeper in the context of potential emotions and sentiments and things like that. In nature, though, we truly did not have an idea of just what kind of influence it had on either party. But this new bit of information would give us some insight into what that looks like potentially. So as this quote from ABC News stated from a few days back, more details about the arrest of former University of Michigan football coach Sharon Moore, who has been charged with home invasion and stalking, including allegations that he had a long history of domestic violence against the alleged victim. End quote. So, yeah, that kind of situation could be something that happened here. Again, it's going to be hard to just look at that initial wave of information and just assume that he was acting a certain way towards this person. But by adding this in there, by adding that layer of context here, that does kind of confirm, maybe affirm in a way for some people, a few different things about the details in there. When you think about how he, at the time, allegedly barged into this person's house, broke and entered into it, and was so willing to literally have this sort of emotional abuse take place. Even if we're thinking about domestic violence in this sense, there's a lot of emotional turmoil that definitely came with something like that happening to this person in her own house, as I already went through. Like, that kind of takes it further back, and again, just kind of reiterates the notion that he, in a way, unfortunately, had some sort of control over her. Whether it tie into the label that he held as a coach and the label that she held as a subordinate, or any other form of context. You are constantly taking that over and over and over and over again, because in that moment, there's a belief that you're not going to be believed potentially if you come out, if you speak about this at the moment where Moore is, at the time, if we're going back to the start of this relationship, he would still be the coordinator at this point. He's ascending to a head coach, and maybe there was a feeling that, okay, if I do this now, there is a chance that, okay, I could potentially ruin every single thing he has worked so hard to accomplish in his career. So, okay, I'm going to stay mum about this. And that is a risque situation, because that stuff truly builds up over time. And ultimately, when Moore felt as though he had that dominion over her, he just expected, and maybe blindly to his credit, given what we know now about how this person went out of her way all of a sudden to just end the relationship completely. He must have always assumed that he was going to be in this situation forever, for the long haul. Which again is just like, come on, man, what is that about, per se? I'm not necessarily sure. But everything was fine as long as nothing was said, as long as they kept on doing what they were doing under wraps. And then the noise started heating up immediately. They literally said it. Shemblackler Hall was flooded with FBI investigators for the last couple months. At some point, that starts to get settled into your mind. And all of a sudden, what he thought was a full-blown guarantee completely got altered at that point of time. Ultimately, the person decided to push through on her word, and ultimately, this is what led to Sharon Moore getting fired. And a lot of that potential anger, again, he had a wave of different emotions at that point of time running through his mind. But at the end of the day, in some kind of blind rage, he's going to cite the one person who knew more information about this potential relationship than any other person. Whether it be at work, whether it be his wife, it was only those two, and those two only. Fittingly, he would try to take that out, even though, again, from the outside looking in, that's not something you're going to go out and do for a number of just obvious reasons. He felt, though, with everything spiraling out of control like this, she was to blame for some reason. And then you get that whole debacle, where with him having these kinds of ideations of self-harm, he was so immersed into that state that he felt it would be fitting for this woman in her own house to have to witness him commit self-harm in her establishment where she resides, where she sleeps at night. And again, as I said in that video, if you go back and you watch that, as much as you have to give both of them their responsibility here, because they were consenting adults in this relationship, I would believe. Although, again, domestic violence makes it to where, okay, some of this could potentially be forced. More of that information could come out with time. I just have to take this at face value. Nevertheless, you're in that relationship together for that long. And then, as you constantly get into this thing so damn deep, it's pretty damn hard for you to break out of that. Yikes, man. So we get some more context here as this ABC News article continues to go into. And I'll just read a couple of things here. Okay, so, quote, Detective Jessica Welker told the court that at 4:10 p.m. on that day, officers were dispatched to the alleged victim's address after her attorney, Heidi Sharp, called the police. Sharp alerted the police that her client said Moore was inside her home attacking her. Welker testified that Sharp advised that Moore had a long history of domestic violence against the victim and that he was very dangerous, according to the transcript of the hearing. Sharp told Welker that her client called her saying, he's here, Sharon is here, and that Moore had armed himself with a knife, and Sharp could hear screaming over the phone, according to the detective's testimony. The alleged incident happened after Sharp and her client had left the University of Michigan after filing a report, Welker said. Sharp advised her client wanted to leave town, so she went back to her apartment and to collect her belongings, according to the detective's testimony. That is when, according to Sharp, the alleged victim heard footsteps outside, and before she was able to secure her apartment door, Moore barged into her apartment with tears in his eyes, Welker said during the hearing. The detective's testimony included details about what allegedly transpired inside the apartment, end quote. And we went through a lot of that information in the last video. Although it's worth mentioning here that the quotes that were mentioned about his potential pursuit of self-harm came after, as this article states, that the attorney for this victim was put on speaker. And as her voice was heard, that's when the shift happened. So there's more clarity in there. But that's a lot to go through. So let's decipher this a little bit. The main thing that these pieces of information do first is establish that the arrest and the event of the client going there to initiate the firing is what is tied together here, not the firing itself. It's about all of what you weren't told initially when you first heard that, okay, Jerome Moore got fired. Yeah, you were supposed to take that at face value in the moment, but you had no idea how he was taking it personally. You had no idea what the intentions of the specific victim in this case were at the time. And really, as things continue to break down, you get a better idea of it, but in that moment, you just weren't too sure. So that's the main thing that's confirmed here. Also, when you look at it, when you think about a long history of domestic violence, it's like this, the entire sequence here, because you hear it, she's attempting to get out of her own house, and yet, as soon as he enters, she's left no choice but to kind of just stay put, try as best as she can to defend herself in the moment, but also with him being armed, you're not really going to try to engage, per se, in anything too physical, even though that would be more his intent here. If the claim is, okay, he's attacking her, which could be seen as strong, but in that moment, you're literally having your property infringed on. It's probably going to feel that way. And we, just got those quotes last week, which again, my goodness, when you look at them on the surface level. And in terms of anything deeper than that, there could have been a few other things that were probably addressed in this high tense manner that forced, at the very least, allow back and forth. And were threats made? Well, hey, some of those quotes were in fact threats, which probably warrant the excess of screaming by this victim here. You see, again, I've not been in these situations. But what I can say is that, domestic violence can leave a lot more of an impact than what you'll see. Now, this, again, it's not always physical. It can be. That's what it's known to be. This feels, when you read through that situation, when you heard some of the quotes before trying to piece it together here, this feels more like emotional abuse. Again, I can't inherently speak on that matter. That's not something that I've been through. But when you actively are in that situation, you're thinking that you have absolutely no way of getting out of it. Like, again, could she have engaged? Yes, there could have been a choice to do that. But with potential years of having to stay on the sidelines and continue to potentially be, I guess, well, one, it was already a violation of the policy that the school put out to prevent shit from happening like this from happening again after the provost and the former president, I should say, already dealt with similar situations. So that's the main thing. But it's like, you try so hard to keep it under wraps, knowing that you are definitely not in a position that is favorable, that is beneficial to you at all? Was there some form of potential intimacy there? Yeah, I'd bet it was an affair for a reason. But there was probably so many other things that came along with that after a while, she likely could not have bared to have continued taking. Yet the damage was done already. He had that much influence on her. He had that much power over her standing, her potential position in this athletic department and under him, that again, saying anything, doing anything at all to advocate for herself would have been damn near a death knell to whatever she was trying to do in the future. Man. So that's another thing that you can take away from this. But also, potentially leaving the entire state as a whole also makes perfect sense when thinking about domestic violence. Now, again, I can't assume anything because what happened is already set in stone. There was an attempt for her to leave town, and it got thwarted by Sharon Moore within just mere minutes, unfortunately. Now you're dealing with all this onslaught of just, again, at the very least, this victim hasn't been identified yet per se, but it's still something that is definitely taking its toll right now. You can bet that. There could have been a number of different reasons why she would have wanted to leave town. Could she have been trying to start anew completely, leave all of that shit behind, and try to move forward? That could be something possible for her. In the case of domestic violence, however, you can imagine that one of those goals might also be for her to get as far away from Sharon Moore as possible. Now, again, the way that he had been contacting her relentlessly, if you go back to the very first wave of information I covered in the very first instance of this, he just kept on texting her, calling her phone, not getting any response whatsoever. And that's what prompted him eventually, on top of hearing about this firing and how she was involved in it, to go into her house of residence and invade the space like that. To potentially do something so absolutely tragic to himself or to her, or to them both, in one fell swoop. Again, you when you are in a situation where you're feeling that kind of way, as it was explained, there is a lot of unpredictability that comes with that. You would have to be on your heels in that situation. You never can really know. So there's no guarantee per se that moving out of town would have prevented Sharon Moore from doing all of that. If he was that obsessed by this point and that willing to cause her trauma, to continue to contact her like this. But at the same time, when it comes to the physical aspect, when it comes to dealing with all that for so long, seemingly feeling like you are trapped in that situation, and then having a moment of potential freedom to just completely rid yourself of that and push forward with your own life, no wonder she would try to take the chance to get out of there. And maybe the goal would have been, okay, we move out of town, any number of things could have been running through her head if she had reached this point. Was she trying to move to a completely different state? Was she trying to file some sort of injunction or restraining order against Jerome Moore when she moved, preventing him from being anywhere near a certain distance from her to prevent these kinds of situations? Because you got to think about it too. He's also just stalking her the whole time as well, allegedly. That was one of the charges that he is actively facing right now. And it wouldn't be enough for her to just be in that same home, having him potentially stand somewhere else right near there, watching her remove. So again, I don't know. I can't assume possibly, with never having been in that situation like this, with not even having the full view at all, because that would be impossible, of what actually happened. But I could think that if she did end up having success in moving over, she probably would have attempted to file a restraining order to stave him off of potentially seeing her in person and trying to pull off some shit like that. Because that would automatically get him caught up with the law. Automatically. And literally, she couldn't have been proven more right to her intuition, I suppose. But also, potentially, to her detriment. A restraining order could, in theory, prevent something like that from happening if it's set in documentation. But of course, those things could get broken still. And even before that thought could ever cross her mind, even before she could even think about where her next move was, while finally being able to break out of this relationship that seemingly grew toxic over time. Maybe started out as intimate, playful, sure, but again, had to, if you're talking about domestic violence here, get somewhat testy. Okay, first sign of potentially being able to break out of that, it's automatically thwarted by that same person, the same perpetrator, allegedly keeping you down for this much time in a multitude of different ways. Violating your own personal space and getting into your own house. You actually, you can't, you can't make that up. You just can't. So that's the first major thing about that when looking at the general history that goes into the relationship and I guess the nature of it as it continued to progress. But another thing people have constantly asked is, at this point, we understood that this person, this victim, still had her job at this point. And I guess some people were questioning why, but this all goes back to a policy from the University of Michigan that I already cited in one of the previous videos. Essentially, the policy when it comes to these supervisor-employee relationships and how they are not allowed, one, in these situations, if they're found to happen, as this Sports Illustrated article states, from that policy statement from USA Today, it's in place to protect the employee from potential abuse by those in power. And as it states, quote, recognizing that intimate relationships exist or may develop in the workplace that are not initiated by a supervisor and are free from coercion and abuse of power, immediate disclosure of the relationship by the supervisor is required, the policy states. Failure of the supervisor to disclose an intimate relationship is a serious offense and cause for discipline up to and including dismissal from employment. Although encouraged, supervisees have no obligation to disclose. End quote. So, to shorten that up real quick, essentially, Sharon Moore being in this relationship, being the supervisor in this situation while this victim was viewed as the subordinate. It was his responsibility to detail everything, and I mean everything, that you could possibly have to offer about the relationship. Knowing that it was wrong, but potentially being willing to get past it and move forward somehow. It was all on him. The onus was there, placed solely on him. And yet, even as they say, you have no need to do it per se if you are a supervisee. There's no requirement, no obligation for them to do so. And the victim ended up doing it. So, with that being the case, Moore was automatically ousted. He wanted so desperately to keep it under wraps for seemingly the longest period of time that he failed to recognize that in that situation, one, you were already doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, but two, in that situation, it's on you to disclose that, not the victim here. So, she's still there, she's still trying, I guess. I don't even know if I can say that it would be the smoothest, I guess, line of work for her right now. Still being in these same areas. But at the very least, she's still got that in name and title. And, she does still have some of the same compensation, generally speaking. So I guess that is a positive. But it can't possibly make up for what she had to deal with throughout this time. And for everything that went on within the context of the relationship. Because there's probably a lot more once the trial actually begins that comes into play here. And that's been the case already now. I won't really give too much merit to this, and especially with not really, again, paying heed to what's going on with some of these tweets, or also having access to truly read any articles from The Athletic. But it was mentioned recently that there were 5 other women who came out and spoke out about Moore contacting them in these kinds of ways. And from what I saw, there were actually 3, as they detailed, that happened to be working in sports media that he reached out to in some manner. Clearly one that they did not have any sort of room to be going through in that moment, and clearly ones that violated just a general sense of decency, if we can say that. So those are situations to be watching out for, especially if there's anything more that comes from them. But as far as I know right now, that's just what I would have to take at the surface level. I was not really able to get too deep into those. If I had The Athletic, I'd probably be able to get some more context there. But hey, there's not much I can do about that there. So in terms of true updates involving Sharon Moore specifically and in name, that's pretty much the latest information on it to this point. But we do have some other influences here, because again, it's not just him, it's not just this victim that were affected in this situation completely. You have to look at this all around. And a few players, and also interim Biff Poggi, would speak out about their sort of takeaway from the situation and how they plan to move forward as a team. There have also been things, again, that I haven't been able to fully get into without having true access to some of these other articles. It has been mentioned that his wife also made some sort of move as the information came out. I don't know what that is, but I'll have to try to see what exactly that's talking about. When it comes to the players, though, a couple players would speak out. You had a junior in terms of linebacker Jimmy Rolder and a senior in cornerback Matthew Berry come out and speak out about their reactions to the situation. Zeke Berry. Okay, so as Rolder states, quote, yeah, definitely in between right now, Rolder said, I'm not really sure what I'll end up doing, so just waiting it out and seeing, end quote. He, as the article from, I guess, Sports Illustrated via MSN states, essentially he was in a number of different situations. He could enter the draft, he could transfer, or he could stay with the team for another year because he has at least one more of college eligibility. So anything could be on the table for him, but I don't know. It's like you want, in his situation, he's been there long enough, and it's like you'd want to stay loyal to the program that gave you an instant opportunity. He's been there for long enough. Hell, you could cement your name in history by being there as a graduating senior in the next season. Like, there's definitely value in that. But with all that noise going around, is that something that you would want to get in the way of your potential individual success as a player? And with not having a true coach in place at the moment, even though Poggi also came out, I guess, a few days later and stated essentially it wouldn't be that long before they find a permanent guy. Do you have enough trust in that as a player to stay there? So that's probably what Rolder is going to be asking himself. And I mean, if neither of those things are the case, then there is a chance that he'd be willing to move forward elsewhere. What exact destination? No clue. But it would be his decision at the end of the day. And similar thing for Zeke Berry here. He also has another year of eligibility remaining, but I suppose that he is a graduate player or at least a fifth-year senior. He's currently a senior right now, but he's probably at least redshirted a year due to injury. And, after constantly being deeper in the rotation as a potential safety, they mentioned that when Will Johnson went down last season, as great of a cornerback as he was for the team, he had to switch his roles and honestly has become one of their more consistent guys. And as he stated, quote, I haven't made a decision yet. Just trying to focus on this game. End quote. So when it comes to players, it's not just going to be them, of course. You have a lot of other players who are in situations where they're long-tenured veterans in the program. Something like this, anything like this, is going to test how you are willing to be loyal to such a program. And they're going to have to do some soul searching collectively. Like, you're definitely going to be tested trying to figure out a specific path here. There may not really be a true answer in mind yet. And who's to say that, you are certain to find a right or wrong? At the end of the day, if it's what works best for them, they're going to make a decision that some people may agree with and some others may not. And it's unfortunate because, again, their hand is being tried as a result of something that some individual, another person, who, again, was slated to be a coach connecting with them this whole time. trying to guide them through their lives. And as a result, they may have to completely uproot their own tendencies and all that they have previously known before just to try to progress forward and break out of this specific streak of time. As for Pudgy, the players here have essentially stated that, hey, as this entire thing says right here, and it's kind of perfect, being that happened, a lot of players were down, but something that he said was, don't let someone else's decisions affect your emotions. And that's something that has stuck with me, said Barry. End quote. And that's a grand message from him. Players have spoken admirably about how Pudgy has been handling this entire thing. And I think that quote says it right there. You know, I can go through and I can say all that. But at the end of the day, even he wants the similar thing for them to be that, hey, you are still your own independent mind at the end of the day. You might have been guided by this person. You could have potentially learned about a lot from this person, picked up a lot from this person. But you are still your own individual man. And you have to be able to control what you specifically can control. You aren't responsible for what another individual did. You aren't responsible, as Pudgy is essentially saying. You are not responsible for former Coach Moore's actions. You simply aren't. You are still, as we know right now, a part of this team, and you can control that. You can control how you choose to move forward with the program or elsewhere or in an NFL draft. You have that choice. You have that right. Just make sure that whatever it is that you do, you don't let it get clouded by those emotions that might still be in your headspace, being affected, of course, by what transpired just a few weeks back. It's hard. It's hard to see that to go down and to still try to bounce back from this with almost feeling like you've completely went off track here. It's difficult. But the thing about it is that even if it feels out of place, you are exactly where you need to be at right now, at this point of time. And Pudgy, I guess, I don't know, they are thinking about a ton of different names. As I've already stated, they've thrown out a ton of different names there when it comes to head coach. And, you know, some of them could be compelling, others just don't make any sense at all. But I'm not going to lie. Let me see. Okay. Well, he is an older coach and hasn't really gotten a lot of opportunities as a head coach. With him already being 65, I don't think that there is really a chance for him to elevate into that spot. Crazier things have happened, but what you can say about Pudgy right now is that when it comes to the transition process, potentially, and we don't even know if that's in motion right now, no choice has truly been made on this yet. But at the very least, he's trying to manage this as best as he can. And the fact that he can say this, he can relay that to a player, speaks volumes about his character as a person. Because think about this from his perspective. I gotta come in here. I'm not even being guaranteed to have a long-term spot as a true head coach on this team. And yet I have to fill this role just so I can clean up this other person's mess for something that I was far removed from. I had no involvement in whatsoever. And now I'm the one left here trying to pick up the pieces of this entire damn program before we have to go out and prepare for yet another game, knowing that this shit that we had to deal with is much deeper than that. That's a lot to take in. That's a lot to take in. But through all that, he's actively living with that quote. And I think that's kind of where this whole thing comes into play here. I think that's where the players are finding this. Like, you see it in PUBG, actively trying to lead this entire unit of grown men. Some, maybe even teenagers still to this point, through what is a very dark period of time right now. And through a tough stretch in just general, I guess, public aspects of the team's history. At least over the last few years, it's felt that way. So you have to give him tremendous respect for that. And that's, again, to tie it all back in and to cap it off, essentially. I mean, that's how this situation is. It's going to be, as I said before, very interesting to see how different parties move forward as a result of all this. Because it is truly difficult. But any number of things can truly happen in between now and then. And whatever they choose to do, whether they're driven by logic, whether they're driven by emotions, can have a lasting effect, for better or for worse, on a number of different things moving forward. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.